We want it on a flatbed. I'm talking about a box smaller than a shoebox for a pair of Nikes. And we want you to get a team of drivers and overnight this to the site. And I remember I was standing down the yard in Houston watching them put a box. They put it so you had a huge deck, dedicated flatbed, and they put the box all the way up towards the cab side, just right there, and threw a come along over the top of it and strapped down the single box and drove away. And I was just like, that's why things are expensive. You needed I was like, airmail? There's so many ways we could have done this, but they're like, no, this is critical. And I said, well, I'm here to serve. Let me help you in any way that I can. So, which is a bit of a prelude of welcoming you, Jim Vinoski, to our show today. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Shep.
And those who don't know, Jim, you're the president of Cosgrove Content and Marketing, and you also host of Manufacturing Talks.
Yep.
Correct? So thank you again for coming in and tell me, those are two things I just said. So you have Manufacturing Talks and Cosgrove Content and Marketing. What are they? We start with Manufacturing Talks, and then let's get into Cosgrove.
Okay. Well, so Manufacturing Talks is my own show, really covering the broad swath of manufacturing, which, as you know, covers a whole heck of a lot of ground. So I'm never wanting for topics.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And so how long have you been doing Cosgrove? Or excuse me, the Manufacturing Talks?
About 3 years now.
Okay. And how many shows have you got, and where can they be found?
I just had 165 go up today, so episode 165. And it's on YouTube, Rumble, and all the podcast outlets.
Okay. And what is it? Do you have an overarching? Let me ask this differently. How do we get there? So how do you get to Manufacturing Talks?
Well, so then I have to back up because I'm also a contributor for Forbes.
Okay.
And I've been doing that for 7 years. So again, just covering anything and everything under the sun for manufacturing. And as I got into that, after a few years, I started seeing some of these other guys who have their shows doing their stuff and thinking, I've got already a whole host of great stories that I've told in the Forbes pages or electronic pages. Why don't we do that with this medium? And so, we were talking before we got on about how you approach this thing. You can do all the prep and try to get it perfect and spend months and months. And I didn't do that. I did what you guys did. I actually went over to my nearby Best Buy, bought the webcam they had on the shelf and the microphone they had on the shelf, and got a couple of folks to sign up to be my first 2 guests, and off to the races.
I guess in there is the power of getting started.
Yeah. Now, I had that advantage of being able to go back to a couple folks I covered at Forbes.com and say, look, I'm launching this thing, and, return my favor of getting you guys that coverage. Come on my show. And they did.
Even if you don't want to.
Well, they were very nice about it. So I don't know if you ever heard of Titan Gilroy. He's like this superstar in CNC machining. So he was one of the two. And then I had the CEO of a place called Alexo Athletica, Amy Robbins. So she founded her own company for concealed carry wear, sportswear for women.
Really?
Because she was accosted out running and had a very bad experience that she wanted to prevent.
What's her name?
Amy Robbins with Alexo Athletica.
Okay. I'll have to look into that. That's a good place to start.
I couldn't have done any better.
Well, how'd you go about, so you had those, and how did you get, I guess, guest number 3 through, 50?
Honestly, probably the first 50 were all people I had covered in Forbes. It was over that first year and a half where I got to a point where it's like, okay, I'm understanding, we can continue to do the same stuff, but there are opportunities to get into things deeper in a show like this, like mine is. And so they started diverging at that point. But I still, routinely have people on who are both Forbes coverage and on my show.
And so when you started, did you have, it sounded like, well, I've already have Forbes going. This is just a compliment to that. And sounds like, was there? I don't imagine there was like a mission critical from the jump as far as what you're trying to get out into the world. You were just sort of saying, okay, tell me experiences and things like that. Has there been a theme that is emerging in the talks that you're giving or the podcasts that you're hosting? Are you wanting or targeting people who have expertise in certain issues or topics that have become to interest you?
So the show has kind of become twofold in its purpose. And the first was the original, which is the same as what my overarching purpose with my Forbes coverage is. And that is to get the stories out of successful American manufacturers, because there are so many people who think we don't make anything anymore, which is utter nonsense. You know, we're still number 2 in the world manufacturer. We should be number 1, in my opinion. We're not. Maybe we can get back there, but certainly still, you know, a manufacturing powerhouse here in America. And I try to go out and find those superstar companies that don't get the respect that they should and sing their praises. So I continue to do that both at Forbes and with my web show and podcast. But the other thing with the manufacturing talk show is it gave me the opportunity to be a little freer with my own opinions. You know, Forbes, I'm allowed to go to a point, but I'm still a journalist, kind of keeping within the more objective mindset. My show is my take, very much what I think ought to be out there. And so, you know, hammering points like what we need to do to get back to that number 1 position, why we lost it in the first place, some of the dumb moves we made, and some of the falsehoods that continue to be spread out there that have led to our industrial decline and that we should turn around.
So in leading up to you being here today, as a responsible host went back and watched some of your content, and it does seem that over time there's been a crystallization of what you're trying to communicate to listeners. And I want to bring us back to sort of a 100 level discussion for a moment, meaning year 1 of college level.
Gotcha.
Why does it matter if we're not number 1 in manufacturing, meaning that we're still getting the stuff we need to live our lives? So who cares?
So there's not one simple answer, but probably the most important answer is national security. So if you look at where we stand today, you know, on the cusp of World War II, we were making more than half the steel that the world used. You can read about the shipbuilding dynamo that we became during that war. You know, everything under the sun, we became the supplier for the world to turn back the tide of evil that was threatening us in the middle of the last century. And we weren't ready at that time, but we're less ready now if something like that were to come back up. And that's not a good place to be. Now, we were able to turn it around and ramp up, and obviously the history books tell how that went. But I just have big concerns that we couldn't do that again today.
We were very flat-footed leading into World War II.
Yep.
And we thankfully did have large-scale manufacturing that could be converted to make what was needed at that time. And there were luckily leadership was in place to get people to turn around and take things seriously.
Well, and you know, I'm no huge fan of a lot of FDR's policies, but one thing he knocked out of the park is he didn't have government people go in and tell manufacturers how to make war material. He brought initially the automakers, executives who had come up from the floor and said, here's what we're going to need to do. And this was in like 1939, 1940, before we were even involved. He knew that we were going to be in trouble if we didn't get ramped up. And he turned it over to him. And that's how you had all these crazy places like Singer sewing machines making rifles.
Yeah.
As you had these guys who knew how manufacturing worked come in and retrofit and swing our manufacturing might that we had at the time in the right direction, and then added to it immensely.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about when you go through a list of companies that were manufacturing something that's unrelated to what we know them for today.
For sure. Yep.
And how many, you take like a B-17 bomber, I mean, there were 4 manufacturers of that airplane model at any given moment, or like the Willys Jeep was being made all over the place. They made some here in St. Louis downtown, what's now the Tums building, I think. But at any rate, point being that there was an unpreparedness going into World War II, and your feelings sort of we're in a similar position as far as national security, as far as readiness for what may possibly occur.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want people to think we don't make anything and that there's nothing out there that could be swung to national defense if we needed it. But today we make less than 5% of the world's steel. Of the clothes we wear, 3%. Shipbuilding today, the U.S. is 0.4% of global output. So in too many ways, we're nowhere close to where we were at the start of World War II. And so that's just a really, really bad spot to be in, especially knowing that, I mean, China's out there saber rattling more and more. And there are certainly other bad actors that could also cause us lots of trouble. That being said, though, there are other good reasons. I mean, the cratering of manufacturing jobs has certainly had a deleterious effect on the fabric of American society. I don't think you can argue any other way. And I would love to see us value making things again, which I don't think we've done for 50 years. Well, not broadly, but people like me still sing the praises, and I think more of us should.
Well, let me help you, or let me pull out some stuff here, which is, you said a matter of national security. And what you're meaning is that because we're not making these products anymore, whether it be, aircraft carriers or whatever, shipbuilding, we're behind. And part of being behind and not making things is also you're slipping on the IP curve as well, because you're not pushing that. And maybe you're designing it, having made elsewhere, but now they've got the IP that was needed to make it. But I mean, intellectual property. But so how do you get to a point where like we're not making as much, and that's a matter of national security, meaning that if something were some sort of offensive onto property of the United States or otherwise, we wouldn't have the ability to ramp up. Is that what you're discussing? Or
that's absolutely a piece of it. Is there are those critical parts that need to be in place, and whether that's mining rare earths for ourselves and processing those so that we don't rely on China for the rare earth magnets, or just getting steel making to some defined minimum so that we know if we had to ramp up on war material, we'd be able to do that. But then, the bigger piece to me, there's IP for sure, and in an increasingly technical and technological world, that's huge. But the people element, what we're losing that we're not at all acknowledging is the know-how. And, we talk about the skills gap now. I don't think people understand that as we lose these skills, these aren't things you readily get back. If you talk to folks in the textile world, for example, they'll say it's hard to find someone who can even service a weaving machine anymore.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because I agree with you. People don't, you can say, hey, we have a skills gap issue, or we have a manufacturing decline issue, and people are like, well, that sounds, I don't know, can I get another venti coffee? So they don't think about it too much. And they're like, because it's not in their car when they get in it, or it's not on fire in front of them as they go through their day. They are noticing, well, things are getting more expensive, but maybe don't necessarily tie it all together. So when you say, well, we have a skills gap issue, like drive that home in a way that people are like, oh, we do have an issue. Like, what does that mean, skills gap issue?
So it's a combination of the immediate ability to do the jobs that need to be done in our factories, in our mines. The way to bring it home to people is look at how tough it is to get someone to come service your air conditioner or do plumbing anymore. That's the same thing. It's there are those skills that only a certain number of people have, and it's a decreasing number. So supply and demand, you're going to pay more for it, you're going to wait longer for it. Well, guess what? In the manufacturing world, if you're waiting longer for it, your plant's down. You're not making stuff. You're going out of business. So we continue to lose and lose and lose. The other piece is bringing the next generation up. How do you teach someone to do, say, manufacturing maintenance if you don't have anyone on staff anymore who knows how to do it? And it's, I think, a lot more difficult than people understand, because people think, oh, you can just read the manual. Well, to an extent, yes. I mean, there are great YouTube videos that teach you how to do a lot of stuff around your house, and I love them. But you'll always reach a point, especially on the more technical things, where it's like, I don't understand, and you don't have a person there to walk you through it. And it's some of it's stuff you can't write down, stuff called tacit knowledge that you can only show someone how to do. If you don't have people with those skills, passing them on an ongoing basis, it goes away, and it's very difficult to ever get back.
So how is this being allowed to occur, though? I mean, the demand, I mean, like, the demand usually pushes things in a certain way, and money can be found typically where there's underserviced demand. So I would think that the economics of, like, okay, maybe in 1985 being a plumber wasn't the most lucrative business in the world, but now it seems like if you've got a plumber who is got his act together and is helpful and responsible and reliable, that, wow, that's pretty cool. I can make a good living doing that. It seems like the kind of, is it the optics of just saying I'm a plumber that keeps people at bay, or do you have a larger systemic issue of people just not wanting to work?
Yes.
Okay,
So
fair enough.
Let me dive in. That the former of what you said, the optics, the incentives to do these jobs. You think about it, the baby boomers were the last generation for whom trades, manufacturing jobs, hands-on work was held as a positive. For 3 generations, we said, oh, no, that's a dead end. You need to go to college. You need to we need to become a service economy because we're a wealthy nation. And it shouldn't be a surprise that, our kids listen to us. And, now the first generation that started hearing that aren't kids anymore. In fact, they're the next retirees. So as those things declined, it just picked up pace. And I will tell you, when I came out of college, I had a guidance counselor who told me straight up, do not go into manufacturing. I'm a mechanical engineer, right? It's like, that's who's talking to me. That's who's recruiting me. Don't go into manufacturing. It's going to be dead before you finish a career, which, again, is completely false, number one, because we continue to be a strong manufacturing nation. But talk about destructive. Fortunately, I didn't listen. I was, headstrong, and
you're young enough not to listen.
Right. Did a lot of stupid things. That wasn't one of them. I went into manufacturing and I had a wonderful career, and I think contributed in a positive way. But think of all the kids who did listen. Think of all the folks like me who went into service jobs. Not to denigrate service jobs, but if you're not making things, that's the root of our society. So now you get into this whole other piece of you're having someone else make it for you. And so there was this whole kind of zeitgeist of, again, people saying wealthy economies naturally become service economies. Well, no, they don't. People choose what to do based on incentives, based on what they can make, based on, what their peers and their family think of them. And so if you're denigrating and, discouraging people from doing these things, and it's seen as a wrong move for a career, people listen and you lose. And so now you're sending it overseas. You have all those skills going over there. We taught the Chinese to beat us.
We did.
Right? And so talk about short-sighted and foolish. And there's a whole other host of things. I have dug into financial measures as well. So Clayton Christensen, I don't know if you ever heard of that guy, the Innovator's Dilemma author.
Yes.
One of his more minor points he made in a few books was how we had accounting measures that were essentially telling us it's not economically advantageous to have manufacturing assets. So get those off your books, have someone else do your manufacturing for you, let them carry those assets, and you're going to be more profitable and make a lot more money, which is true in the short term.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not wrong. It
No.
just depends on, the transaction of time.
Except as he showed, the trouble is then you start by handing off this low-level manufacturing, low-level supply stuff, and your competitors then increasingly learn to take over higher and higher and higher levels. That's the whole root of the innovator's dilemma, is you wind up not being able to keep up with the change. And that's the other piece. You lose that innovation. And so it's just, in the long term, it's cutting your nose off to spite your face.
And then the second part of my question was, where is everybody then?
Well, oh boy, now that's a whole other topic.
Well, yeah. Well, I think that a lot of people ask the question,
Yep.
which is, people talk about, there all these jobs are available, but people seem to be living their lives without going to work, I suppose. So, which I think was really made evident during COVID. I think
Right.
there was a pattern of work. I think people's work cadence changed due to COVID, and you go to any fast food restaurant, and it's like you can see it plain as day.
Yep.
On a road trip, and you go to whatever burger place, and there's like 2 people in there hustling the whole place.
Yep.
So how are these people subsisting? Like, how does this work?
Well, yeah, and so that's a whole public policy realm that.
Is it?
Well, in part. Again, it's a complex issue. I just finished a book that actually Mike Rowe recommended on my show called Men Without Work. Then he's Nicholas Eberstadt's the author, digging into, really, it's been since the 60s, 70s that male workforce participation has just been on this steady decline. Went from nearly 90% at the end of World War II to below 70% today, 68%. And so...
And is that, sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but so World War II is a problematic benchmark, though.
It is.
Because it represents an anomalous time as far as the production output that was
Yep.
required.
Yep.
But nonetheless, a benchmark. So how would you handicap that benchmark?
Well, and that's why he really stresses the late 60s, early 70s is where it really started, because then you certainly had economic things going on. Obviously, that wasn't.
But you got back to homeostasis.
Yeah, the stability of our markets and the workforce was fairly well back to what we would expect. But that being said, at the end of World War II, to that point in 68, 70, 72, it didn't change that much. And then all of a sudden it just went over a cliff and continued down. And he shows how it really wasn't driven so much by recessions or economic upheavals. It was just this steady decline. He actually included in his book some folks who challenged that a little bit, but conceded that it wasn't entirely driven by the economy. And so, it is public policy where you pay people not to work nowadays, which is unfortunate. I would hope that people would want to be self-sufficient and not a slave to the state, but there are those who choose that, if it's going to be the same thing to be on disability or be on welfare as I would make in this low-level manufacturing job, okay, I'll go home and play video games. It happens. It's not the whole explanation. There's a lot of
How
other
much
factors.
does that happen? I mean, are we talking like 12, 15 people or?
No, millions and millions of people.
Millions of people, and it's primarily men.
Well,
Is that what we're finding, or only in the context of manufacturing?
The problem started with men in the early days, and this is another dynamic of women joining the workforce who hadn't before, and so the women's workforce participation continued to grow through the first 2-3 decades when the problem with men began, but now it's falling as well.
That sounds like a serious problem.
Huge problem, yeah. The other piece that's also a big contributor, especially among men, and especially among minority men, is the felonies that keep people out of work. And that's one that I've taken on in my show and my Forbes coverage. Had some really great people talking about it's unfortunate that people get afoul of the law, but then they've paid their dues to society by going to prison. Now you're not going to let them work when they get out of prison? How is that? Number one, how is it fair? You don't sentence them to that, but then how are they going to recover? How are they going to rejoin society? And yet that's what we do.
That's a great question, because I think on one hand, it's not horrible to know if you're dealing with somebody who has a track record of behavior that is a certain way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what resumes are, right?
Yep.
What's their background, and how can they be helpful to your organization? So on the one hand, it's par for the course. It's part of vetting out a possible hire. On the other hand, it seems like, that's really going to put them at the bottom of the stack. And they've probably been rehabilitated and they're focused, ready to get after it. And here they are being met with a dead end because of what they've got to stick on a resume.
Yeah. So, and it's more than just work as well. It's housing, it's transportation, it's family life. They're all affected by that. And, I'm not saying that you just assume everything's hunky-dory and, hand them things. I don't think that's the way to go, but you also don't erect enormous roadblocks that make their lives a living hell as they're trying to get themselves back into
Let me ask, how
society.
would you manage that if you had unilateral authority to make changes there? What would you do?
Well, I'm no fan of government action. I'll tell you that straight up. I think government programs tend to create more problems than they solve. I think as companies struggle to get the people they need, it should be this fairly obvious thing that, okay, if I can't get the talent I need today, what do I have to change? And one of those changes should be, okay, I might need to put a little more effort into, if people come to me and they've got that black mark on their record, okay, I'm not going to just rule them out. I'm going to give them an opportunity. I'm going to help them with those challenges. There are great companies. I interviewed a couple of them. One guy right in my area is a company called Butterball Farms. Mm-hmm. There's one down in Cincinnati, or I guess up in Cincinnati from here.
Yeah, up and over.
Shoot, I forget the name of that one. It'll come to me in a minute. But they specifically put in programs to not only bring people in and help them with the immediate transition of coming out of incarceration and going into the workaday world, but again, those other things that tend to derail them, like housing, like transportation, even like just making sure they don't fall in back with that crowd that got them into trouble. And so, it's obviously more than what typical HR, typical personnel activities entail. But if, again, you can't get the people you need and you've got this group of potential employees that want to work, that want to learn, that want to be participating members in what you're doing, I would think it'd be kind of that no-brainer to say, yeah, let's do a little extra effort and give them a chance. Yeah.
Well, I think that, if they've paid their dues, it seems, on paper, I'll say at least, it makes sense to get them assimilated and back into what they were hoping their lives were going to be.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I've never had that kind of trouble in my life, but I know that from observing life that people who end up in that kind of position, it wasn't because they were spending the majority of their time doing it. It doesn't take a lot of time to take a misstep.
That's right.
And so they're not all bad. There's just there's a lack of mentorship or something happening there that kept them from taking that step.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not to say there aren't those who just aren't going to rejoin society. We all have our choices to make, and some people continue to make poor choices, and they will suffer the results. But for those who are truly wanting to rejoin productive society and to make those changes, make something of themselves, they should get that hand up.
And so to the decline of manufacturing, what do we do here? I mean, part of it is getting the message out and trying to wake people up. But at the same time, I think people hear this message and they're like, well, I mean, you can go work in that job. Or, I think people have they're kind of like, well, yeah, we should handle that. Why aren't you guys handling that? And so how do we
Yep.
a lot of delegation going on as far as who should be the actual person doing that.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's good to talk about, but how are we actually going to mobilize? How do we actually mobilize the solution to this?
Yeah. And it's a very tough question because at its core, it means manufacturers themselves having to step up and drive these things. No one's going to do it for us.
Right.
And so I would say here for decades and decades, I mean, going really back to the certainly 1970s, the early 70s, manufacturers kind of just stood mute as our policymakers, our voters, you can point the blame at a lot of different people, kind of abandoned the whole idea of cost versus benefit analysis and just came up with these things that it's like, oh, environmentalism. Well, it's all good. So anything we do to promote the environment is by its nature good. Mm-hmm. Let the chips fall where they may. If that means the steel mill down the road goes under, that's what we need to do to keep our environment pristine. Mm-hmm. And it's, to me, a little bit of kind of that one part of the country dictating to the other part of the country. But it's also this failure of those of us in manufacturing to push back and say, look, we'll meet you on cleaning things up. I mean, I give manufacturers enormous credit around driving things in the right direction, whether it's workplace safety or, environmental protection. Yes, there are regulations that help that along, but now, we've got 300,000 individual regulations that manufacturers have to adhere to every day. And that's millions and millions and millions of pages. And I've read some of those pages, and I'm here to tell folks, don't bother reading them for yourselves because they're dense legalese that manufacturers have to abide by. And there's way too much that is excessive, that is repetitive, that is superfluous. And yet the law says
it's got to be a legal document that long must be contradictory as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so, when you erect these roadblocks, what happens? Eventually people can't keep up. It's costing them more money to make things here than makes sense. You send it overseas. Well, guess what? You sent it overseas to a place that doesn't have those regulations, that doesn't have manufacturers who are willing to step up and improve. They're out there making it as cheap as they can, treating their people literally in China as slaves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I loved how Jeff Leimbach was show you mentioned that you watched, the author of this book about some of why American manufacturing went overseas. And he had this wonderful formulation I'm going to steal and use as my own. And that is, we have offshored misery.
Yes.
And so people are suffering more overseas. The environment is being degraded more overseas than would have been done here under the standards we had back in 1968.
Yeah.
And yet here we are layering more and more and more and more regulations on in the intervening 60 years or so and driving more and more of our production overseas. So who's going to defend against that? It starts with us in manufacturing. We've got to say, look, we're not against regulations. We're not against protecting the environment, protecting people. But we are against having things that are supposedly doing that and yet get to a point where it's just overkill and forcing our work overseas to people who don't care the way we do.
Well, it seems not to be cynical about things, but it also seems overtly about money.
Well,
when people talk about it's the nobility of save the environment, shrouds a lot of profits.
It's absolutely true.
And so that's sort of the cynical, sort of distasteful side of what's happening. I'm not saying that as a blanket statement. I think there's legitimate things that occur, and I think there are a lot of there's a lot of parasitic activity occurring as well, which is we're going to glom onto this noble cause and we're going to wring it out. And unfortunately, I think that's becoming more and more overt as time goes on because more and more science about climate change is coming out. And
Yep.
and as you're talking about, which also was, that COVID really exacerbated and made this, really blew this out from behind the curtain, was how little people want to work and sort of these trade-offs we're making. And when I look at this, I think the biggest cost is, yes, we have national security issues. We just don't have the capability and we just don't have the network of manufacturing we did. It's all coming from overseas, not all, but you know what I mean, quite a bit.
Yep.
And vital materials like steel is a huge one. But I think the biggest cost that we're going to see is just the mental side of all of this. Like people who are growing up, and you know, the cold hard truth is, I think happiness resides on the other side of achievement. And
I like that. I might steal that one too.
Please do. But that's where it resides. And when I'm faced with a challenge, the first thing I do is smile, because I'm like, when I get through this piece of crap challenge, I'm going to sit on a step somewhere. When I'm finished, I'm going to be like, I did it.
Yeah.
And that's to me where happiness resides. And once you get that first one, you're ready to go do another, because you know, happiness, and you hear parents a lot saying, I just want to be happy. It's like, well, then give that kid a shovel and teach him how to put a post in the hole, put a post in the ground, and put concrete, get it level, and do these different things, because they're going to turn around and smile at you and be like, I did it.
Yep.
And that's setting them sort of on a path of achievement, which in a path of achievement is a path of fulfillment, which is happiness.
Yep.
And I think that's, to me, when I look at the landscape and say, what's going to be the biggest cost? It's going to be sort of the self-loathing nature that accompanies stagnation.
Yeah, well, and society. I mean, we've got choices to make, and I think we're at this inflection point where there are a lot of people realizing we've done really, really stupid things as a society, you know, both from a business perspective, but also from a people perspective and a psychiatric perspective. You're exactly right. You know, achievement isn't someone telling you you're great and then you go do whatever job, you know, gets you by, whether it's productive or not, and you should have self-esteem. No, it is absolutely achievement, risking, failing, getting back up, doing things and making things happen. I'm a huge proponent of scouting. I have one Eagle Scout who's 20 now. I have one who I'm going to brag on because he just finished his Eagle Scout service project this month. And, you know, it's exactly along the lines of what you're talking about. So my son, AJ, listened to one of our adult leaders who lives in this neighborhood where there's a very popular biking path. And right in one section near where he lives, neighbors had just decided, you know what? That green area there off the trail is a great place to dump our yard waste and our Christmas trees and the hay bales we decorated last Halloween with. Just this eyesore right off the trail, right in our downtown. And so this adult leader heard AJ was looking for a project, said, well, why don't you get this fixed up? And so he did. He did a cleanup, got all that yard waste and trash and stuff hauled out, and then flattened and cleared an area, mulched it, put in a bench and some plantings. So now there's this nice little resting spot right there where there wasn't one before. And it was one of the hottest days we've had. He had a dozen scouts and leaders out there, all sweating like mad, busting their butts, hauling out logs, breaking up this old giant Christmas tree someone dumped there, shoveling and weed whacking. And I mean, it looks phenomenal.
He probably feels real good about that.
I hope he does. He should. And that is why I love scouting. Is, you know, my predecessor as Scoutmaster would say, we have kids who get cold, but no one freezes. We have kids who are a little hungry, but no one starves. Scouting is a safe place to fail.
Yeah.
And yet it's also about leadership development in the outdoors. And I think it's irreplaceable. Getting kids off the screens, getting them out in the wild, going through those difficulties. The best troops are scout-led. They decide what we're going to do. They, set the agenda. They get the supplies. They lead us into the wild, and then we all deal with the consequences of how well it was planned and prepared.
Well, you've touched on something twice, so I'm going to bring it up, which is earlier you talked about, you said video games and then screens. And so I'm sensing, through my keen sense of sensing, that you think we might have a screen problem that is might be underpinning some of a larger problem.
Yes and no.
Okay.
So my generation is the one that was it's the TV. This is ruining our kids, the TV. Now it's the games or the phones or whatever. I think it's really about moderation in anything, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with video games. Both my sons are gamers. They love going in the basement on our big screen and spending hours down there.
Yeah.
But they're also both, here soon, they'll both be Eagle Scouts. I think when you are introducing those right values and at least getting them away from that and into what they need to develop as full human beings, there's nothing wrong with gaming. There's nothing wrong with TV. But when you hear about kids who are literally on screens all day, every day, and we have this growing obesity problem, increasing health problems. The percentage of kids now with diabetes is skyrocketing, and we're doing something wrong. And so, what are the things that are working? That's why I tout scouting so much. Is look, I know it works because my kids don't have a lot of those problems. We've got our problems, and everyone does. But my God, if you get to that point, change, do something different.
Yeah, I see kids and that are, we have young kids, they're 10 and 8, and, I'm a major dick about screens. I'll just tell you right now, like, I believe that you need to manage your real life really well before you can enter a virtual life.
Yeah.
Because
that's a great way to put it.
Growing up is, it's a challenge. And we didn't have any of this extra life that we're trying to maintain.
Yep.
And you're not going to be able to, unless you've galvanized a real physical relationship with it. You got your handful of buddies and you know how to navigate a real world. Until you can do that, there's no sense in a virtual world because that's ultimately going to be hurtful.
Yep.
If shit hits the fan in that world, because you can't go back to your real world and be like, kind of go get regrounded.
Well, and so now you're hitting on a whole other topic that really relates to everything we've talked about, and that is community.
What community?
I mean, just the notion of community.
Right,
and
that's what I mean.
Right. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore, and there's so much that goes into that. You talked about the problem with some of the greed and the kind of mistreatment in the business world. I think we in the business world own a lot of that breakdown in community. Mm-hmm. And so that's
Tell me
piece.
more about that.
Well, again, I'm coming at it from that manufacturing end, but, it used to be, even in the early days of my career, we in the plant were all friends. We would do stuff together. We wanted to do stuff together after hours. We had interests. We had things that we would do individually, but we would come together as a business, and that was also a community. At the same time, we didn't make it so that our workers couldn't go, take care of their families, take care of their church obligations, their community obligations. And it's just become this whole thing of business is everything, and it's cutthroat, and there's no friendship, there's no loyalty, none of it. And who killed it? It was business leaders.
Yeah. It's a responsibility to stakeholders.
Right.
Drives these things. And on the other hand, you're like, well, that's a hard thing too, because, Bryzos is a business and we have to do what's best and be, good custodians of all things.
For sure.
And so
and make money.
And make money. And as all things become more sophisticated, hopefully a responsible amount of shrewdness also comes with it.
Yeah.
And you have to be, you have to be competitively wise as far as what systems that you're installing in your own business and aware of what's going on and, angles. And I think that's why you got to vet out the companies that you deal with is like, okay, what practices are occurring internally to the best I can tell. And is that something I want to align myself with?
Yep.
But you commented on something when you talk about community. I remember growing up, so I grew up in the city here, and all the houses were close together. And at night, everyone sat on their stoop.
Yep.
People were out on the stoop. We were out. I think we were like roller skating. I think my skates had metal wheels on it. They used to spark. They go over your shoes, like really crappy skates. But you didn't care because you're so busy falling, you couldn't think about it. And so we were on the steps, and then people would walk over, and you do not see that, period.
Yeah.
And it's funny, we were down in Kentucky Lake last year, which is just kind of a few hours from here.
Yep.
And we were down there, and I was talking to a guy who is local to that area, and he was I was taking my boat out of the water, and I must have been doing a great job because he's like, you need some help. and I was like, I'm good, but yeah, let's love the help. Actually, you can do the whole thing. But we started talking, and he took me all the way back. So we've been in that area for several generations before the dams had occurred to create Kentucky Lake.
Yep.
And he talked about how, we used to own the land right there that's now the water.
Oh, wow.
And then so he felt that maybe his family didn't get market rate for that, but his dad got wise, or granddad or whomever, and then just bought a whole bunch of land over there because he's like, they're probably going to do it again over there. So they did fine and all that stuff. Yep. But I said, where is everybody this weekend? Because it was like Memorial Day weekend or Labor Day weekend or something where I was like, why is it not slammed? And he goes, video games.
Oh, geez.
And I was like, really? Tell me about that. He goes, well, there's not much to tell. He's like, before smartphones and things like that, this lake was so crowded you didn't even want to go on it. And now it's just what you said. There's nobody out of here right now. What the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And he goes, the only thing I can think of is that people aren't getting out and adventuring. And so now they can, you used to take your kid to go tubing so they stop pulling on your pant leg, right?
Right.
And now they're not pulling on your pant leg anymore because they're playing video games. That means you can hang out with your buddies on the deck, have a couple thousand beers and everybody's happy. And so I never really thought about it. He just said it so clearly.
Yeah.
And, I haven't vetted out his statement, but I would say conceptually speaking, what a shame.
For sure. Yeah.
Because some of and where I'm going with that ultimately is, and I've told this before, which is whenever with really most people, you go outside and you pal around and, even if someone breaks their ankle doing something, people are generally feeling the sense of adventure and fun and bonding, and usually backslapping on the way back.
For sure.
And then if you have anytime someone has playing a video game or anything like that, I'm talking about raising children, anytime you say it's time to put that stuff down, there's no backslapping occurring. These things are fight instigators, and they're sources of division or discord within a family. And you're just like, so you're left with the option, which is, okay, we can moderate this, which still leads to just discord until they get a little older. We can eliminate them or say, you know what, do what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that easy button becomes way tempting.
It becomes in the pressed position. So eventually I just grabbed them. They're still on my desk. I was just like, wait, we only get one shot at this. And they're designed, and I think there have been arguments about, well, they're going to be behind versus their peers and all this stuff. And I said, no, these things are designed to be so easy to use that the first time you use it, they're up to speed. So that really kind of falls on deaf ears to a degree.
Good.
So but I want to ask you, if you had a magic wand, Jim, this is a huge question to ask, but if you had a magic wand from a manufacturing standpoint and a skills gap standpoint, what are the first 3 or 5 things you would do? Just like, okay, bang, that's no longer happening. Bang, what would just be kind of your magic wand things you'd do?
Well, shop classes are huge. Too many schools got rid of those, and that was a big piece of that, just falling away of those basic skills that you just used to be able to take for granted that people coming in would have. They no longer have them because of that. Mentorships and apprenticeships focused on trades are huge. It's funny because you hear people who do it and they're all kicking themselves for not doing it sooner and singing the praises, and yet it's still this minority of manufacturers who are getting after that and taking part.
So a structured pipeline of mentorship. A
program to bring people who are interested in going up that ladder in and, pair them with someone who has that knowledge to, show them the ropes and essentially train their successors. Those are 2 huge ones. Again, I mean, the whole public policy thing of where we're paying people not to work is insane. We're not going to close the gap without getting a lot of the people who are on the sidelines today back in the workforce.
And just to clarify, I mean, the programs aren't explicitly worded that way, but effectively, if you're weighing out your options, right, I can go bust my hump for 8 hours a day doing this, or I can just file disability or whatever and get what they view to be an acceptable amount of money for that. They can, we'll make that work.
Yeah.
So effectively, they're being paid not to work.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. And, if you think back to the 90s under the Clinton administration, they had the welfare reforms that introduced or reintroduced really work requirements, and it was wildly successful. Well, guess what? Obama came along and undid it.
Yeah.
And so we're right back where we started, which is just utter insanity. You're not helping people by doing that.
What was the stated reason for doing that?
I don't know what the stated reason was. I'm very cynical when it comes to that stuff, and I just think one of our parties is very invested in having people be dependent on the state.
Okay, and so that's a couple items. And when you think about how worried you are about this, 2 questions, which is this is literally happening right now?
Yep.
And are we feeling the impact of it now? And how, when you sound the alarm bells, could you be sounding more alarm bells, or do you have them all ringing?
Oh boy!
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
How? Do you just want to scream in the mic, wake up, everybody! It's time.
I'm sure there's more that I could be doing. As someone who's in this kind of new career of, I've got to kind of market myself as a consultant, but I also want to be one of the leading voices. In fact, I told Mike Rowe I want to be the Mike Rowe of manufacturing. Mm-hmm. He's doing that phenomenal job with getting people back into the trades and getting those programs reestablished. We need the same thing in manufacturing, and I want to be a leading voice for that. So, to some degree, it's got to be a balance. I sound the alarm, but I also play up the positives. And the biggest thing I can say right now is we are in a moment in manufacturing in our country today that I never have seen in my 37-year career, where all these forces are aligned now, where people in general are realizing, geez, we've really kind of screwed things up here and we should fix it. And we've got public policy things that are headed in the right direction. And we've got a groundswell of manufacturers now who realize we've got a problem and are ramping up. And so it's not that it's all doom and gloom. My concern is that, you look at the broad scope of what we've discussed here today. It's a huge problem that has so many different threads and elements to it. How do you effectively marshal resources against all of that? And yet that's the challenge.
How do you cross the chasm here?
Yeah. If you're not hitting on a majority of the things we've talked about here today, this moment's going to pass and we're going to fail.
Yeah. And what is just hard question to answer?
Yeah.
What does fail look like?
we've seen.
Like when it comes home and just to my house, what does that fail? Like we can no longer afford this, or this. No, it's maybe not even available to us anymore. What does fail look like?
I point to the UK and Germany as what fail looks like. Their problems are even worse because they're under the thumb of these utterly insane leaders who've prioritized net zero over everything else.
Yes.
And they are literally deindustrializing their countries, driving prices through the roof for their people. And then there are these societal things that are happening that I think are related to that mindset. You know, you hear about they're arresting people for viewpoints now in most countries. In Germany, they've essentially banned one of the political parties because it basically says the same thing that our Republicans say.
Yeah.
And they're saying, oh, that's tied to Nazism. Well, no, it's not, but that's their way of moving against it.
You could argue detaining the counterparty.
Thank you. Yes. Who's the Nazi here, right?
Yeah.
And yet it's so far been successful. And by successful, I mean for the people who want to retain power at all costs, their people be damned. But that's where those two countries are. And I mean, during the last election, I was an over-the-top alarm bell about energy policy because if that election last fall had gone the other way, we would be right there with the UK and Germany. We already had federal policies that were taking us toward that same net zero goal. Those have largely been turned around by the new administration. There's still a lot of work to do. There's still fully half our states that are still on that same net zero insanity. Mine being one of them. Michigan, we're going to shut down all our coal plants in the next few years. They're spending, our governor took away local control of zoning for energy projects just so that now the Democrats can force wind and solar onto people whether they want it or not. That's where our state is. And there's not near enough wind and solar to replace the capacity that we're shutting down. The one bright spot is we're restarting Palisades nuclear plant, but that's about 1/9 or less of what we need. And that's not even talking about growth if we get data centers and all that, which we should be vying for, or more manufacturing, which we should be vying for. We're in a bad way, and 25 of our states are.
I think maybe a polarizing comment that I would have is that I don't think we're really trying to solve the energy problem.
Not yet, not honestly.
Let me give you an example of why I think this, which is we have volcanoes, okay?
Yep.
That come straight to the surface of the earth that could turn a turbine indefinitely, and such an immense amount of heat, conducting rods down there, such an immense amount of heat could actually, you could afford an enormous amount of waste in the transfer of that heat to mechanical energy because it's that source, at least for the foreseeable future, and I mean at least 1 million years probably, is going to continue to bring insane amount of heat to the surface. And why not, tap that with conducting rods, turn water into steam to turn turbines, and you could push that energy all the way across the United States. Like, why not do that?
I don't know that you can do that. I do know that there's a lot more geothermal opportunity than we're taking advantage of. Iceland does a phenomenal job with that, so they could be a great model for those areas. And to your point, we don't have to solve the problem all at once, but why aren't we doing that where it's obvious?
Yeah, I mean, you just think of like we're on a rock that has a core of liquid metal.
Right.
Okay, like generating heat to turn a turbine should not be something that we have to ignite something. We have plenty of heat beneath our feet. Then a more absurd comment, I was thinking about an electromagnet. If we took the Earth spinning on an axis. Now, this could have some serious climate implications if you start doing a polar shift with this, but if you started wrapping wounds of copper out in our orbit, to kind of capture, turn the Earth into a generator. But I think that could get some people real pissed off.
Yeah, you're starting to sound like those people who are busy trying to plot how they can do the climate engineering by dimming our sun. We heard this one here.
Well, I didn't realize that dimming the sun was an option.
Apparently, in the last week or two, it's come out that there was a group trying to sneak that under the radar, that they were going to start doing this project to dim the sun.
Did they share how that one might do that?
Well, I mean, they're going to inject God knows what into the atmosphere. And
so put some sunglasses?
On the Earth.
On the Earth?
Yeah, and that's going to work really well. That's where,
feels risky.
So I'm a free market advocate, and what I will say is there are certainly always opportunities, but if you're assuming there are like enormous wealths of free energy out there that we are not tapping into, I know that's probably not the case, because if it could make someone money, they're probably already going to be doing it. But again, if we value the innovation and the doing and the industry, using that as a generic term, behind going after those opportunities, we'll have that innovation and we can bring it home. That's the kind of thing, again, going to manufacturing as a microcosm of it. We've been denigrating the whole notion of that for generations now, and it's hurting us on being able to solve problems we have today.
Well, I think that there's the rub between what someone might want to do to generate electricity or energy and what's going to be politically permissible, right? Which is
and what's going to get the right people's pockets lined.
Right. So I think that I don't know that we have exhausted our ways to generate energy.
And I'm by no means suggesting that.
Yeah, in a clean and extremely efficient way. And but these, talking about jobs, these other ways of doing this could eliminate a lot of jobs, which would make me an opponent to a degree of doing it. So there are reasons also that these other embedded industries, because we know that they create X amount of jobs and they're embedded and they're working. And so when is the right time to say, well, how psyched would oil companies or otherwise be about, for instance, tapping the volcano heat that they know is inexhaustible, at least in the very long near future? And what are the implications of doing that?
Well, and I want to dive a little more into that idea you had about where you said it's eliminating jobs. And I'm with you there that you've got to be careful around that. I think that's another piece of what we've done poorly, is kind of understanding the positive direction of what Joseph Schumpeter, an economist years ago, termed creative destruction, which is new things coming along and supplanting the old. I mean, the buggy whip makers went away for a very good reason, right? We shouldn't be trying to save those jobs. And yet at the same time, if the reason the buggy whip makers went away wasn't because the car came along, it was because some environmental zealot decided that the land they were on had turtles on it that we had to protect and booted them over to China to make their buggy whip, that's a whole other story. So it's a difficult societal challenge to know, okay, when is job destruction actually a positive, and what are we going to do about it as a society? I think there is a government role in helping mitigate some of the effects of the positive changes we see.
Yeah.
But it's another one of those thorny problems, right?
Yeah. I think that it begins to feel high friction really quickly is what I would say.
Well, and I think we've got bigger fish to fry before we get to those nuances.
Well, perhaps. And so how do you, as you're moving forward through your journey to become the voice, along with Mike Rowe, and I did listen to that podcast, and I thought you did a fabulous job.
Oh, thank you.
It was really good.
That was fun.
And I would encourage everybody who's listening to go listen to it, because it's good. And because you guys have such complementary things to say, meaning that they slot well together, in that you guys are both kind of creating this united front of we need to be paying attention over here.
Yep.
So what are your next steps as far as trying to continue to, marshal resources and, usher this thing forward? How do you do that?
Well, so in addition to my web show and my Forbes coverage, I also started my own Substack. So I'm doing my own writing. Again, not taking away from what Forbes has offered me, which is the most tremendous opportunity I ever could have imagined to become something much greater than I would have on my own. But again, they've got that kind of journalistic set of rules that I have to adhere to. I'm happy to do that while I write for them, but it's not going to get me sounding the alarm, highlighting the problems that I feel have to be put out there in front of everybody. And so that's a big piece of now both my show and the Substack is, okay, here are problems. Here are some of the things I think we should be doing about them. Hey, everyone else chime in. Give me your ideas and how do we mobilize against these things?
Yeah. And so I, as a parent of younger boys, what do you see or any recommendations? You got a couple of Eagle Scouts, it sounds like.
Almost.
There are a lot of people who are listening to this that say, well, it sounds like I need to be mindful of this. How do we not sort of slip right into that as parents who are figuring this out and navigating, all the peer pressures and all that sort of stuff? I guess it's educate yourself, stick to your guns kind of thing.
It's definitely an educate yourself thing. We all have our own values. I think people are largely realizing that there are these very kind of critical problems with youth today. The health and obesity thing, we've got to get turned back around in the positive direction. I think your points about screens are spot on. I think, scouting is one piece, one possibility. It's worked for me and my family, but I know other kids who have gone whole hog on sports. Find those things that reinforce your values that help by their very nature solve some of these other problems. If you've got your kids in sports, they're probably not going to be suffering from the health problems that idle kids are increasingly suffering from. We as parents, I think we've been involved, but maybe have allowed too much of the societal direction to get away from us. And so how do you stand athwart history and holler stop?
Well, it's also, I think, a bullwhip effect from how most of us were raised in the 70s and 80s.
That's true.
Which is, I would say, it's a bit of a laissez-faire approach. And we might be, I think about it, I'm like, yeah, maybe a few more minutes with my parents now and again would have been nice. If they'd ask, hey, where were you?
But I'm glad you bring that up because I don't think that would work today. I loved it as a kid.
Fabulous.
God almighty, I would tell my mom I was going to my friend's house and I'd be gone all day. She didn't care where I was.
I told you, I don't care where you go. Just don't be here.
Yep, be home for dinner.
Yeah.
Knew when that was. It just, I think society, because of some of the technology things, because of some very much deeper divisions in how other people are raising their kids versus how you want yours raised. You don't have the commonality anymore. You don't have the safety. It's just things have changed to the point where that laissez-faire that, it might have had some problems associated with it, but it worked pretty well for us. It will not work today. So we've got to find our own way of how do we encourage proper risk-taking? How do we get kids away from that pernicious influence of the games and phones and all of that? Find your own way to do it. But I think people are realizing there's this whole confluence of problems that we've got to work against. So how do we come together to do that?
Yeah, and the other thing I've had to remind myself, like, my kids are broke as shit. If I take away their phones and, TVs and stuff, like, we did that, and we were like, okay, TV's within, they gripe for a couple days, but then all of a sudden the coloring books are out, and the baseball gloves came out, and all that, and I was just like, it's still in there. Like, if we would stop facilitating this sort of sedentary lifestyle, they're still humans, and they're going to go find a way to be entertained, and you may end up in the ER because someone broke their chin open or whatever, but that's okay.
One thing that my wife and I try to do very actively with our boys is be the hosts of their group ups.
Yeah.
So, if the kids need to find some place to go, we wanted to make sure, hey, the other parents are going to be comfortable with us automatically. So if one of my sons says, group up at my house tonight, everyone's going to come and be at our house in person doing crazy stuff in our basement.
Yeah.
Not necessarily just solo on a screen.
Yeah. And we had a similar family when I was growing up, and they called it the mousetrap.
Oh, nice.
I didn't ask how they got there, but I got the essence of what they were saying, which is, you guys are all going to be doing something stupid, but at least we know where you're doing it, and we understand what we think are the risks. Like, you can't get in too much trouble in the basement.
Exactly.
But I'm going to wrap us up by saying thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shep. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It's been a pleasure. And so, again, where can people find you quickly to listen to your talks that you're doing?
Yep.
Manufacturing Talks. Where is that?
Manufacturing Talks is on YouTube, Rumble, and any podcast outlet. Also on my Substack.
Okay.
And Manufacturing Talks is my Substack as well. So search those up. Find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. I'm always looking to grow my followers there because that's where I put most of my content. But I'm on X. I'm on Instagram.
All right. Well, you're looking for Jim Vinoski. All right.
Jim Vinoski and or Manufacturing Talks. They'll find me.
All right. Great. Thanks.